I want to talk to you about figure eight knots. A lot of people have heard of them. Some people have never heard of them. And a lot of people get really confused about how to tie one. If you type in a Google search or search YouTube for figure eight knot, you end up with a lot of results for climbing knots, which is essentially the same knot. But when it comes to fishing, there are a couple of variations to the figure eight knot. And depending on what breaking strain and diameters of line you're using, the type of figure eight knot you tie varies. And I've never really seen a definitive video where it explains why you do these two different ways, or even that there are two different ways. So what I wanted to do today is just spend a little bit of time explaining the two types of figure eight knot, when to use them, and overall what applications you can use a figure eight knot for. So if we start out, the basic figure eight knot that you'll see when people describe it on climbing sort of videos and things, a figure eight knot can be tied in a single length of line. And what you do to tie a figure eight knot is you double it over as if you're going to do an overhand knot or a surgeon's knot. But instead of putting this tag end through and creating an overhand knot or going through a couple of times and beginning a surgeon's knot, the figure eight knot takes a little bit of a different turn when you get to this point. So doubled over, we then twist this part and pull the tag end through. And if I start to pull tight, you'll start to see where the term figure eight comes from, because you start to get this figure eight sort of shape. Now if I was to pull that down tight, you'd get a single knot that's not, apparently not a lot of use to a fisherman, just a knot in your line like that. A lot of people might call that a wind knot. But this can actually be fantastically useful as a stopper knot. If you look up our ladder leader for nymphing, we used this kind of stopper knot to basically put a ladder of knots in the line that you can then attach droppers off. But that's a story for a different day. Look up ladder leader or follow, I'm sure we can put a link in this video somewhere for some of our ladder leader information. The nice thing about the figure eight knot over an overhand knot, it spreads the load much better. An overhand knot's much more likely to snap when you put it in a length of line and pull on it. But also, if you look at that, the tag end leaves in the same plane as the actual line that runs into it. So you get no break in the sort of continuity of your line. If you were to put an overhand knot in, you usually get it come off at an angle, so your line takes a turn. And if you can imagine tying a ladder of these knots, it'd be all zigzagged in different directions, and you wouldn't have a particularly straight line, which is not ideal if you want contact in your nymphing. So there is a use for an overhand, a single figure eight knot in a single stranded line. Another use, if you've ever fished 10 carat or you want to fish with a level length of line as a leader, like a Euro nymphing leader, if you're finishing in something like sort of 8 pound plus line at the end of the leader and you want to attach tippet on, you can put a stopper knot like this in the end and then hitch a figure eight loop onto your line and butt down to it. We'll maybe look at that in another video. So that's a figure eight knot in a single strand, but that's probably not why you're looking at this video. You want to know how to tie figure eight loops and figure eight dropper knots, because this is the one that people really struggle for information on. So a figure eight loop, there are two ways to tie it. I'll cover both, and I'm going to take a little bit of time now to explain the difference. There's a double loop where you spin your loop twice, and there's a single loop where you spin your loop once. The reason you choose one over the other is the thickness and breaking strain in your line. So let's take a look at the single turn one first. So what I'm going to do, I've got a doubled over length of line. I'm going to make the beginnings of an overhand knot. So we take this over. Now, if you were tying a surgeon's loop or a water knot, you'd put that through there 2 or 3 times, round, 2, 3, and pull tight. That knot puts a huge amount of weakness into your line. You can lose 40, even 50% of your breaking strain. If you don't believe me, tie one in the end of a piece of tippet and tie the knot I'm about to show you in the other end and give it a pull and see which one breaks first. So this is the single turn. We turn that once, we grab that and we pull it through, and you'll see that characteristic figure of 8 in the knot. Can you get that, Paul? We've got a good focus on that. Yeah. So when that's pulled down tight, we'd trim this tag end off, and that'd be our loop, and it's very, very strong, provided it's in 8 pound or more breaking strain. It seems to be sort of 8 to 10 pounds where the single twist gives you the most strength. So anything over 8 pounds, I'd usually do a single twist. Let me just do that for you one more time. We start by looping things over, we turn that once, and then we pull through. So that's the single figure of 8. If you're going to use what most fly fishers would call tippet thickness of line, something around 4 or 5x or thinner, so we're in the sort of 5 or 4 pound breaking strain respectively there, you're going to need 2 turns in that loop. So when we loop this over like that, we'll do 1 turn, then a 2nd turn, and then put things through. Now in this thickness of line, it's going to be quite difficult to tighten down. You know, paracord is not ideal for getting this knot to tighten down, but if I do that, you can see there, it looks quite a complex knot, but all it is that figure 8 knot with 2 turns before you pass it through. That really spreads the load. You can see everything there is doubled over. When it's pulled tight, it's a very, very strong knot. If you don't believe me, try tying that in the end of a length of tippet, and in the other end, try tying yourself your preferred loop knot. Let's say it might be a 2-turn water knot, or surgeon's knot, as some people call it. It might be 3 turns. Give it a try, tie that at one end and the surgeon's knot at the other end. I guarantee you that if you've tied this knot right, the surgeon's knot will break first every time. This is a tremendously strong loop knot. So whichever you use, the single or the double, as I say, for me the cutoff is around 8 to 10 pound breaking strain. If it's a fairly high-tech 8 pound line, I might put 2 turns in the loop. If it's an old school like Maxima 8 pound line, I'd probably put a single turn in. When we're into 10 and 12 pound line and up, it's definitely a single turn for me in the figure 8 knots. But anything at what I would use as tippet, which is typically 4 and 5x for most of my fly fishing, it's 2 turns. So that's your loop. I use exactly the same knot when I'm creating droppers, or if I'm attaching the thin end of a tapered leader on dry fly setups to a length of line. So it's exactly the same knot, but a lot of people get confused when you're not tying a loop. Well, how can it be the same knot? Because there's no loop. So let me bring in another length of line. Let's call this our dropper. If I can keep the line on the table, that'd be good, wouldn't it? So this could be the end of a tapered leader, and this could be tippet for dry fly, and we want to join 2 pieces together. So I'll get a good overlap, just because this stuff's so thick. We form that loop, turn it once, turn it twice, and pull through. And there'll be a tag end and a long piece when you're tying 2 pieces together, but it's exactly the same knot that we've tied when we tie a figure 8 knot. And if I snug that down, you get a very, very nice, neat knot. And with 2 colours, you can kind of see a little bit of where all the line's going. So that's when you join 2. If you want a dropper, you just make sure that one end is extra long. And if this is point fly and this is dropper, you never use that as a dropper and bend the knot back over itself. So whether you're joining 2 pieces or creating a dropper is exactly the same knot, but some people get confused when you see a figure 8 knot tied with it doubled over, and like, how do I join 2 pieces? Just put 2 pieces together and do exactly the same knot. That's figure 8 knot. I really can't stress enough how much extra strength the figure eight brings over a water knot. Just make sure you kind of use that cut-off point. And if you are in that sort of 8 to 10 pound breaking strain, you might want to do a bit of experimenting before you fish with it, between 1 or 2 turns, to see which works strongest for you. And the way to test if it's strong enough, get yourself a length of tippet, tie your old knot on one end and the figure eight knot on the other end, give them a pull, and as I say, virtually guarantee that the figure eight will break any other knot you want to try against it. It's a really, really strong knot. Give it a try. If you think you've got a stronger knot, I'd like to know about it. You know, if you can find me in person, I'll take that challenge. Drop a comment if you think you've got something stronger, or if you've given this a try and found it's beating your knot, let us know. Drop us a like, subscribe. Join us next time. I'll give you a few more knots and rigging tips.